The day I became the most famous person on Maple Street was the same day I finally got revenge on Karen Donovan. She'd been parking in front of my driveway for 6 months straight, and the $4,500 I spent on a rusted-out Pontiac turned out to be the best investment of my life. If you're watching this video while a neighbor's car is blocking your driveway right now, drop a comment telling me how long you've been trapped. I bet my story will keep you entertained until the tow truck arrives. My name is Marcus Harrington, and until 7 months ago, I was living what most people would consider a perfectly normal suburban life. I'd spent 12 years working my way up from junior accountant to CFO at a regional insurance firm. I had a comfortable 3-bedroom Tudor-style home in Ridgewood Estates, a respectable neighborhood where most folks kept to themselves and took pride in their well-maintained properties. I was, by all accounts, a model citizen, paid my taxes on time, maintained my lawn according to neighborhood standards, and never caused trouble. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at you that no amount of careful planning can prepare you for. My challenge came in the form of Karen Donovan, who moved into the house directly across the street 8 months ago. The first few weeks were uneventful. We exchanged polite waves when retrieving mail or taking out garbage. She seemed normal enough, mid-40s, always impeccably dressed in what appeared to be designer workout clothes, her highlighted blonde hair cut in a sharp bob that seemed to never move, even in wind. I later learned she worked in pharmaceutical sales, and more importantly, was the recently divorced ex-wife of some hotshot attorney from downtown. Information that would become relevant as our conflict escalated. The trouble began innocuously. I noticed her silver Mercedes SUV parked directly across from my driveway one Tuesday morning as I was leaving for work, not technically blocking me in, but positioned in a way that made backing out more difficult than necessary. I thought nothing of it. People have guests, delivery services need access, life happens. But then it happened again the next day. And the day after that, always in the exact same spot, always making my exit from my own driveway needlessly complicated. After 2 weeks of this new pattern, I decided the neighborly thing to do was to address it directly. I waited until I saw her retrieving packages from her porch one Saturday afternoon before walking across the street. "Hi there," I called out with a friendly wave. "I'm Marcus from across the street." "Yes, I know who you are," she replied without looking up, continuing to examine the label on a box. "I wanted to ask if you might consider parking your car a bit further down the street. When it's positioned directly across from my driveway, it makes it pretty difficult to back out in the mornings." Karen finally looked up, her expression suggesting I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. "I'm not blocking your driveway," she stated flatly. "I'm parked completely legally on a public street." I kept my tone friendly despite her chilly response. "You're right. You're not technically blocking it, but the street is narrow, and when your car is right there, I have to make a 3-point turn just to get out without hitting anything. There's plenty of space further down that would work just as well for you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I prefer to park in front of my own house. I'm not breaking any laws. Perhaps you should practice your driving skills if backing out is so difficult for you." The dismissive tone caught me off guard. I'd expected a normal, reasonable response from a neighbor, perhaps an "oh, I hadn't realized," or "sure, no problem." Instead, I got hostility for what seemed like a simple request. "I've been driving for 25 years without incident," I replied, still trying to keep things civil. "It's just a courtesy I'm asking for." "And I'm not obligated to provide it," she said, gathering her packages. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." With that, she turned and walked into her house, leaving me standing bewildered on her walkway. I told myself it wasn't worth making a big deal over. Some people just aren't naturally considerate. I'd find a way to manage the inconvenience. But what I didn't realize then was that this wasn't just about convenience or parking preferences. Looking back, I think Karen saw my polite request as a challenge to her authority, one that she was determined to win. The very next day, I found her car parked even more precisely opposite my driveway, positioned in a way that required me to make not just a 3-point turn, but a 5-point turn to exit, without scraping either her Mercedes or my neighbor Dave's mailbox. It was so perfectly aligned with my driveway that it seemed intentional, a message rather than coincidence. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued with increasing precision. If I left for work at 7:30 a.m., her car would be there by 7:15. If I mentioned needing to leave early for a meeting, somehow her car would appear even earlier. It was as if she was monitoring my schedule to ensure maximum inconvenience. I tried different approaches. I left a polite note on her windshield explaining the difficulty. The next day, I found the note torn into pieces on my front lawn. I attempted to catch her in person again, but she seemed to have developed a sixth sense for avoiding me. I even casually mentioned the situation to other neighbors, hoping someone might have some insight into dealing with Karen, but most just shrugged sympathetically. That's just how she is, seemed to be the consensus forming among those who'd had their own minor run-ins with her. Things escalated when I had to rush to the hospital one evening after my mother had a fall. Karen's car was perfectly positioned across from my driveway, and in my haste to leave, I cut my turn too sharply and scraped my rear bumper against her side mirror. The damage to her car was minimal, a scratched mirror casing that could be fixed for under $100. The damage to my bumper was similarly insignificant, but you would have thought I'd totaled her vehicle. Within minutes of my return home that night, thankfully my mother was fine, just a sprained wrist. Karen was pounding on my door, smartphone in hand, photos of the damage displayed prominently on the screen. "You hit my car," she announced without preamble when I opened the door. "Yes, I did, and I'm sorry about that," I acknowledged. "I was in a hurry because my mother was in the emergency room. I'd be happy to pay for the repair." "This is a limited edition Mercedes mirror casing," she informed me, as if discussing a rare artifact. "It'll cost $900 to replace properly." I blinked in surprise. $900 for a scratched mirror cover? That seems excessive. Maybe we should just go through insurance. "No insurance," she cut me off. "I don't want my rates affected, cash or certified check only, and I'll need it by Friday so I can schedule the repair." Before I could respond, she thrust a paper into my hand. "Here's the estimate from the Mercedes dealership. I expect payment in full by the end of the week." The estimate looked suspiciously like something she'd typed up herself, but it had the dealership logo at the top, so I couldn't immediately dismiss it. "Look, I'm happy to make this right, but I'd like to at least call the dealership myself to verify." "Are you calling me a liar?" Karen's voice rose sharply, her eyes widening in what appeared to be practiced outrage. "First you damaged my property, and now you're accusing me of fraud." I raised my hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I just want to— I've documented everything," she continued, holding up her phone again. "The damage, the estimate. I even have dashcam footage of your car hitting mine. If you don't pay by Friday, I'll be forced to take legal action. My ex-husband is a partner at Donovan, Prescott and Worth. Perhaps you've heard of them." The name was familiar, a prestigious firm downtown known for aggressive litigation tactics. I was beginning to understand the situation more clearly now. This wasn't about a scratched mirror. This was about establishing dominance in our little suburban ecosystem. "Fine," I sighed, wanting the interaction to end. "I'll have a check for you by Friday." Her expression shifted instantly from righteous anger to smug satisfaction. "Excellent. I knew you'd be reasonable." She turned to leave but paused on my porch steps. "Oh, and Marcus, you really should be more careful backing out of your driveway. It's dangerous to drive so recklessly in a residential neighborhood." The irony of her statement, given that her deliberate parking had contributed to the accident, wasn't lost on me, but I was too tired to point it out. I simply closed the door and leaned against it, wondering how a simple neighborly request had escalated to extortion so quickly. I paid the $900 against my better judgment and the advice of my friend Tanya, who works in insurance, and insisted the repair couldn't possibly cost that much. "You're being scammed," she told me bluntly over the phone. but I wanted peace more than justice at that point. I figured $900 was a small price to pay to end the conflict and move on with my life. I was wrong. The payment didn't end anything. If anything, it emboldened Karen. Not only did she continue parking directly across from my driveway, but she now did so with what appeared to be gleeful precision. On 3 occasions, I found her car parked partially blocking my driveway, just an inch or two over the line, but enough to make a statement. Each time I documented it with photos and called the non-emergency police line, but by the time an officer arrived, the car had mysteriously moved just enough to be legally parked. "Unless the vehicle is clearly blocking your driveway, there's nothing we can do," Officer Martinez explained during his 3rd visit. He gave me a sympathetic look. "I understand it's frustrating, but parking on a public street is legal as long as they're not crossing that driveway line by more than a couple inches." "She moves it as soon as she sees me make the call," I explained, frustration evident in my voice. "She's playing games." Officer Martinez sighed. "Look, Mr. Harrington, between you and me, we get calls like this all the time. Neighbor disputes over parking are common, but they rarely qualify for police intervention. Have you tried talking to her directly?" I recounted my previous attempts at communication and the $900 mirror incident. He winced. "Yeah, that's unfortunate, but still not really something we can help with unless there's harassment or threats involved. Maybe try the neighborhood association." Ridgewood Estates didn't have a formal HOA, just a voluntary neighborhood association that mainly organized block parties and coordinated holiday decorations. They had no enforcement power whatsoever. Still, I decided to try that avenue, reaching out to Gerald Foster, the current association president. Gerald was sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. "We can bring it up at the next meeting," he offered. "But honestly, Marcus, these things usually work themselves out. Have you tried just parking on the street yourself, claiming that spot before she can?" I had, in fact, tried exactly that. For 3 consecutive days, I'd parked my own car on the street across from my driveway when I got home from work. Each morning, I found my car had been boxed in, with Karen's Mercedes in front and a different vehicle behind, usually belonging to one of Karen's frequently visiting friends. After the 3rd day of being late to work because I had to knock on doors to get someone to move their car, I gave up on that strategy. By month 4 of this bizarre parking war, I was at my wit's end. I'd tried reasoning, documentation, authorities, community intervention, and even strategic parking of my own, all to no avail. Karen seemed to view my every move as a new challenge to overcome, a new game to win, and she was winning. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday when I had an important client meeting downtown. I'd left plenty of extra time, knowing I'd have to navigate around Karen's perfectly positioned Mercedes. But when I opened my garage door that morning, I found not just her car across from my driveway, but a large delivery truck double parked next to it, completely blocking my exit. The truck had Donovan's Delights Catering emblazoned on the side, a company I later learned was owned by Karen's sister. The driver was nowhere to be found, and my repeated honking brought no response. After 15 minutes of searching and knocking on doors, including Karen's, where no one answered despite her car being in its usual spot, I had to call a rideshare to get to my meeting. I arrived late, soaking wet from the rain, and looking thoroughly unprofessional. The client was understanding, but the damage was done. I'd lost my composure during the presentation, distracted by the morning's events, and their decision to go with another firm was probably influenced by my obviously frazzled state. That evening, as I took a taxi home, since my car was still trapped in my garage, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about inconvenience anymore. This was affecting my livelihood, my professional reputation, and my daily peace of mind. 6 months of psychological warfare over a parking spot had pushed me to a breaking point. I sat in my kitchen that night, nursing a glass of bourbon and contemplating my options. I could move, an extreme solution to a parking problem, but one that had actually crossed my mind more than once. I could escalate to legal action, though my attorney friend had already warned me that without clear evidence of harassment, I'd be wasting my money. I could try ignoring it completely, accepting that backing out would be a daily challenge for as long as I lived there. Or I could try something else, something unexpected. The idea came to me around midnight, after my second bourbon. It was so simple, so elegant in its pettiness, that I actually laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. If Karen was determined to claim the public street in front of my house as her personal parking domain, perhaps it was time to show her exactly how that game could be played. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. As soon as Karen left in her Mercedes, precisely at 8:15 a.m., as she did every weekday, I got to work. First, I made some calls, starting with my buddy Vince, who owned a used car lot on the edge of town. "I need something specific," I explained after exchanging pleasantries. "Something big, legally operational, but aesthetically challenged." "You're looking for an ugly beater," Vince clarified, amusement in his voice. "Exactly. Something that runs but looks terrible, and ideally very large." "Any particular budget?" "Under 5,000, ideally less, and I need it today." Vince whistled. "Must be some story behind this request." "You have no idea," I assured him. By noon, I was the proud owner of a 1987 Pontiac Bonneville, a massive boat of a car stretching nearly 18 feet long. It had been painted at least 4 different colors in its lifetime, with the current exterior being a patchwork of faded blue, primer gray, and what appeared to be hand-painted flames along one side. The interior smelled like 3 decades of fast food and cigarettes. The upholstery was cracked and taped in multiple places, and the muffler made a sound like a dying whale when the engine turned over. It was, in short, the most hideous vehicle I'd ever seen. It was perfect. The car was technically road legal, Vince had assured me of that, with current registration and insurance, though the latter cost me only slightly more than a nice dinner for 2. I paid $1,200 for the Pontiac, a price that Vince himself admitted was probably twice its actual value. "Consider the premium a rush fee," he joked as we completed the paperwork. "Plus entertainment value. I expect a full report on whatever mischief you're planning." My next call was to my neighbor Dave, whose house was 2 doors down from mine. Dave and I weren't close friends, but we'd always been on good terms, occasionally chatting over fence lines or while collecting mail. More importantly, Dave had his own history with Karen. She'd reported his teenage son to the city for playing music too loudly in their garage while practicing with his band, resulting in a noise violation fine. "Dave," I said when he answered, "I need a favor, a somewhat unusual one." "Those are the best kind," he replied cheerfully. "What's up?" I explained my plan, expecting some resistance or at least cautionary advice. Instead, Dave was enthusiastically on board. "That woman had my boy in tears after the police showed up," he told me, his voice hardening. 16 years old, practicing in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday. Not even that loud. She didn't even come talk to us first, just called the authorities. Braden almost quit the band over it. So yeah, I'm in. Just tell me what you need. What I needed was simple. Dave's 2010 Honda Accord, positioned strategically at the precise moment required. He agreed without hesitation. My final call was to my friend Tanya from the insurance company, the same one who'd warned me about the mirror scam. I needed information about the legalities of street parking, and Tanya had handled enough accident claims to know the rules inside and out. As long as both vehicles are legally parked, properly registered, and moved at least once every 72 hours to comply with most municipal codes, there's absolutely nothing she can do, Tanya confirmed after I outlined my plan. "It's petty as hell, Marcus, and I love it. Just make sure you document everything in case she tries to claim any damage." With my team assembled and my information gathered, I put the plan into motion. I parked the hideous Pontiac directly in front of my house, claiming the spot that Karen had been using as her personal territory for months. Then I waited. Karen returned home at 5:30 p.m., right on schedule. I watched through my living room window as her Mercedes slowed in front of her house, her head turning to observe the rusty monstrosity now occupying her spot. For a moment, she simply idled there, as if waiting for the offending vehicle to somehow recognize its transgression and move of its own accord. When that didn't happen, she pulled into her driveway, her movements sharp with obvious irritation. I expected an immediate confrontation, but to my surprise, she went into her house without approaching mine. Perhaps she was recalculating, adjusting to this unexpected development in our silent war. The next phase of my plan required patience. For 3 days, I left the Pontiac exactly where it was, unmoved, while parking my regular car in my garage. Karen, meanwhile, was forced to use her own driveway, a perfectly reasonable solution that had been available to her all along. I observed her giving the Pontiac death glares each time she came or went, but she made no move to confront me about it. On the 4th day, as expected, she made her move. I'd been watching for it, knowing that most cities have ordinances requiring vehicles parked on public streets to be moved every 72 hours. Sure enough, at exactly the 73-hour mark, I spotted Karen on her phone in her front yard, clearly reporting an abandoned vehicle. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. As soon as I saw her end the call, I casually emerged from my house, keys in hand, and approached the Pontiac. Karen immediately changed course, intercepting me before I reached the car. "Is this thing yours?" she demanded, gesturing at the eyesore with undisguised disgust. I adopted an expression of mild surprise, as if just noticing her. "Oh, hello, Karen. Yes, it is. Just picked it up recently. It hasn't moved in days," she pointed out acidly. "I've reported it as abandoned." I nodded understandingly while unlocking the driver's door. "Thanks for your concern, but it's not abandoned. I'm just about to move it right now, in fact." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't park that monstrosity here. It's an eyesore. It brings down property values." "It's a public street," I reminded her mildly, echoing her own words from months earlier. "As long as I'm parked legally and move it regularly, there's no problem. Isn't that what you've always said?" The recognition flashed across her face, the understanding that I was throwing her own logic back at her. For a moment, she seemed almost impressed by the maneuver, before her expression hardened again. "This isn't over," she stated flatly before turning on her heel and marching back to her house. She was right about that, at least. It wasn't over, it was just beginning. I started the Pontiac, wincing at the unholy noise it produced, and drove it exactly 1 car length forward before parking it again. Technically moved, legally parked, mission accomplished. The next morning, I found Karen's Mercedes parked directly behind the Pontiac, effectively blocking it in. This was expected and indeed part of my plan. I left for work in my regular car as usual, garage door closing behind me as I backed out carefully, made easier now that there was no car directly across from my driveway. Karen, I noted with satisfaction, would now have to either move her Mercedes or be blocked in by her own strategy when I returned with the second part of my plan. She chose to move. By the time I returned from work, her car was parked in front of her house, not in her driveway, notably, but on the street. This told me everything I needed to know about her mindset. She wasn't looking for convenient parking. She was looking to dominate the street space. Now that I'd challenged her claim to the spot across from my driveway, she was establishing a new territory. It was time for phase 2. I texted Dave, who arrived within minutes in his Honda Accord. As planned, he parked directly behind Karen's Mercedes, closing the trap. With the Pontiac in front and Dave's Honda behind, her car was completely boxed in. Both our vehicles were legally parked on a public street, with plenty of space between them and the nearest driveways. There was nothing she could do except fume, or move her car into her own driveway, where it should have been all along. "How long do you need me to leave it here?" Dave asked, as he handed me his spare key, a gleeful expression on his face. "Just until morning," I assured him. "I'll move it before you need to leave for work." "Take your time," he said with a wink. "I can catch a ride with Braden if needed. Kid just got his license. He's looking for excuses to drive." That evening, I treated myself to a glass of good scotch and a seat on my front porch, enjoying the unseasonably mild weather and waiting for the show to begin. I didn't have to wait long. At precisely 6:15 p.m., Karen emerged from her house and headed toward her car, designer handbag slung over her shoulder, clearly intending to go out for the evening. I watched with poorly concealed interest as she approached her Mercedes, only to stop short when she realized her predicament. For nearly a full minute, she simply stood there, assessing the situation from different angles, walking from the front of her car to the back, measuring the distances with her eyes. Even from across the street, I could see the moment she realized there was no escape. Her car was perfectly, legally trapped between two legally parked vehicles. What happened next exceeded my expectations. Rather than immediately confronting me, Karen pulled out her phone and appeared to make a call. After a brief conversation, she returned to her house, her posture rigid with anger. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up, the same Officer Martinez who had responded to my previous calls. I stayed on my porch, sipping my scotch and pretending to read a book while watching the interaction from the corner of my eye. Karen emerged again and led Officer Martinez to her car, gesturing emphatically at the Pontiac and Dave's Honda. Even from a distance, I could hear the shrill edge to her voice, though not the specific words. Officer Martinez walked around all three vehicles, examining the spacing, checking for any infractions. Finding none, he appeared to explain something to Karen, who became increasingly agitated. Finally, unable to resist, I set down my book and strolled casually across the street. "Evening, officer," I greeted him pleasantly. "Is there a problem?" Officer Martinez looked at me with an expression that suggested he was piecing together the situation. "Ms. Donovan says these vehicles have her blocked in." I made a show of examining the parking arrangement. "They appear to be legally parked on a public street," I observed innocently. "Not crossing any driveways, plenty of space between them." "That's correct," Officer Martinez confirmed, a hint of resignation in his voice. "Both vehicles are legally parked." "That's ridiculous," Karen interjected. "They're clearly parked this way on purpose to trap my car." I raised my eyebrows. "That's quite an accusation. These are just two cars parked on a public street, as is your right as well." I turned to Officer Martinez. "Is there any law against particular vehicles parking in legal spots on a public street?" "No, sir, there isn't," he replied, and I could swear I saw the ghost of a smile cross his face before he composed himself. "As long as they're moved at least once every 72 hours and aren't blocking any driveways or fire hydrants, they're not in violation." Karen's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "This is harassment. He's doing this deliberately." Officer Martinez sighed. "Ms. Donovan, without evidence of harassment or any parking violations, there's nothing I can do here. These vehicles are legally parked on a public street." "That's exactly what he told me when I complained about your car, Karen," I added helpfully. "The street is public property. No one owns these parking spaces." The look she gave me could have melted steel. Officer Martinez, recognizing an escalating situation, stepped between us slightly. "I suggest both of you return to your homes," he said firmly. "Ms. Donovan, you may want to consider using your driveway in the future to avoid this situation." "This isn't over," Karen hissed at me as Officer Martinez began walking back to his cruiser. I smiled pleasantly. "I believe that's the second time you've said that today. Have a nice evening, Karen." As promised, I moved Dave's car early the next morning, freeing Karen's Mercedes. By the time she emerged from her house at 8:15, both cars that had trapped hers were gone, with only the Pontiac remaining in its original spot in front of my house. I observed her from my kitchen window as she stood on her front walk, staring at the street with obvious confusion and suspicion. After a moment's hesitation, she got into her car and left for work. As soon as she was gone, I repositioned the Pontiac to its original spot, directly across from her driveway, precisely where she had been parking for months to inconvenience me. The message was clear. I could play this game too, and I had resources and allies she hadn't accounted for. When Karen returned that evening, she pulled directly into her driveway without hesitation. I considered this a victory, but I knew better than to think the war was over. Someone as committed to conflict as Karen had proven herself to be wouldn't surrender after one defeat. I was right. The next morning, I discovered a neatly typed notice taped to the Pontiac's windshield. It had an official-looking header with Ridgewood Estates Neighborhood Association at the top, though I immediately recognized it as fraudulent. Our neighborhood association used a different logo, and besides, they had no enforcement authority whatsoever. The notice claimed that vehicles detracting from neighborhood aesthetic standards were prohibited and subject to towing at the owner's expense. It cited a non-existent bylaw and was signed by management, with no specific name or contact information. I carefully removed the notice, added it to my growing file of documentation, and then placed a call to Gerald Foster, the actual neighborhood association president. Gerald, has the association recently issued any notices about vehicle aesthetics or parking restrictions? I asked when he answered. No, nothing like that, Gerald confirmed, sounding puzzled. We don't have any authority to restrict parking or tow vehicles anyway. Why do you ask? I explained about the fraudulent notice, and Gerald's confusion quickly turned to concern. That's impersonating the association, he noted. Not to mention potentially illegal if she actually tried to have your car towed based on fake regulations. Do you want me to talk to her? Not yet, I replied. I'm handling it, but I wanted to confirm this wasn't legitimate before I proceed. Well, it's definitely not from us, Gerald assured me. And for what it's worth, I've heard from 3 other neighbors this week who are thoroughly enjoying watching Karen get a taste of her own medicine. The Mitchell family 2 streets over said they'd gladly lend you their old pickup truck if you need another vehicle. I laughed. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'm covered for now. Thanks for confirming about the notice. Anytime. And Marcus? Good luck. That woman has needed a reality check since the day she moved in. Karen's next move came that weekend, when I spotted her talking to a tow truck driver in front of my house, pointing at the Pontiac with animated gestures. I quickly grabbed my documentation file and headed outside. Excuse me, I called as I approached. Is there a problem with my car? The driver, a burly man with a name patch identifying him as Mike, looked between Karen and me with a wary expression. This lady says this vehicle is abandoned and needs to be towed, he explained. It's not abandoned, I replied calmly. It's registered, insured, and moved regularly. I have all the documentation right here. I held up my file. He's lying, Karen insisted. It hasn't moved in over a week. It's an eyesore and a hazard. Mike looked uncomfortable. Look, I need proper authorization to tow from a public street, either from the police or the vehicle owner. Call Officer Martinez at the police department, I suggested. He's already confirmed that this vehicle is legally parked. Or better yet. I pulled out my phone and showed Mike photos I'd taken each day, showing the Pontiac in slightly different positions as I'd moved it regularly to comply with city ordinances. The timestamp on these photos indicates the car has been moved within the last 24 hours, I pointed out. Mike studied the photos, then shook his head at Karen. I can't tow this, Mum. There's no legal grounds. If you have a dispute with your neighbor, you need to resolve it another way. This is outrageous, Karen sputtered. I'm not paying your service call fee if you refuse to do your job. Mike's expression hardened. Ma'am, my job is to tow vehicles when legally authorized to do so. If you called us under false pretenses, that's not on me. The service fee stands. Karen looked like she might explode. Without another word, she stormed back to her house, slamming her front door hard enough that the sound echoed down the street. Mike turned to me with a bemused expression. Buddy, I don't know what's going on between you two, but that is one angry lady. Long story, I sighed. Thanks for checking the documentation. No problem. Word of advice, though. You might want to invest in a security camera for that thing. He nodded toward the Pontiac. People like that tend to escalate. His warning proved prescient. 2 days later, I woke to find the Pontiac had been vandalized overnight. Eggs smashed on the windshield, and what appeared to be garden mulch dumped across the hood. Given the car's already apocalyptic appearance, the vandalism almost improved its aesthetic. But the intent was clear. Karen was moving from inconvenience to property damage. Fortunately, I'd already followed Mike's advice. The night after the tow truck incident, I'd installed a small security camera in my front window, positioned to monitor the Pontiac. Reviewing the footage, I was unsurprised to see Karen approaching the car at 1:47 a.m., carrying a basket of eggs and a bag of mulch. The video evidence was crystal clear. Karen, still in what appeared to be her daytime clothes, methodically vandalizing my vehicle under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Her face was clearly visible, her actions deliberate and unhurried, as if she had no fear of consequences. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for, a clear, documented escalation that crossed the line from annoying to illegal. With the video safely backed up to multiple locations, I called the non-emergency police line and requested to file a report. Officer Martinez arrived within the hour, viewed the footage on my laptop, and shook his head in disbelief. "Well, that's about as open and shut as it gets," he remarked, completing the report form. "Do you want to press charges for vandalism?" I considered the question carefully. While part of me wanted Karen to face legal consequences for her actions, another part recognized that an official record of the incident might be leverage enough. "Let's start with the report," I decided. "I'd like it documented officially, but I'm willing to hold off on pressing charges if the behavior stops immediately." Officer Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's reasonable. I'll have a talk with Ms. Donovan, show her we have clear evidence, and explain the potential consequences if this continues. Vandalism charges might seem minor, but they can impact employment, loan applications, all sorts of things. People like her," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "People used to a certain social standing often respond strongly to even the threat of having a record." He was right. Within an hour of Officer Martinez's visit to Karen's house, my doorbell rang. When I answered, I found Karen on my porch, looking simultaneously furious and chastened. "We need to talk," she said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. I leaned against my doorframe, making no move to invite her in. "I'm listening." "Officer Martinez showed me your video." She practically spat the last word. "He says you're considering pressing charges." "That's correct," I confirmed. "Vandalism is a crime, Karen. Unlike parking on a public street, which is perfectly legal." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she visibly restrained herself. "I'm willing to pay for cleaning the car." I couldn't help but laugh. The car cost me $1,200, and frankly, the eggs and mulch probably increased its value. This isn't about money. "Then what do you want?" she demanded, dropping all pretense of politeness. "It's simple. I want exactly what I asked for 6 months ago. Basic courtesy between neighbors. Park in your driveway, or at least not directly across from mine. Stop harassing me and my property. Behave like a normal, reasonable adult." Karen's jaw tightened. "And if I agree to these terms, then the video gets deleted, no charges filed, and we go back to being neighbors who merely wave occasionally and otherwise leave each other alone." She was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Her pride was battling against the very real threat of legal consequences. "Fine," she finally said, the words seeming to cause her physical pain. "I'll park in my driveway, and I won't touch your vehicle." "Excellent," I replied pleasantly. "Oh, and I'll need that in writing. A simple signed statement acknowledging our agreement should suffice." Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. You've proven yourself untrustworthy, Karen. I'm not deleting evidence of a crime based on a verbal agreement." For a moment, I thought she might explode with rage right there on my front porch. Instead, she drew a deep breath and nodded stiffly. "Draw up your statement. I'll sign it tomorrow." "Perfect. Have a lovely evening." I closed the door before she could respond, savoring the small victory. The next day, I presented Karen with a simple document I'd prepared, stating that she agreed to park in her driveway or in areas not directly impacting my ability to exit my driveway, to refrain from damaging my property, and to maintain a respectful distance in all future interactions. In exchange, I would not pursue vandalism charges and would remove the offending vehicle from in front of my house within 7 days of the agreement. She signed it without a word, though the pen pressed so hard into the paper that it nearly tore through. True to my agreement, I arranged for Vince to collect the Pontiac the following weekend. He arrived with a flatbed tow truck, grinning broadly as he surveyed the egg-stained monstrosity. "I see your ugly baby got even uglier," he remarked, circling the car. "It served its purpose," I replied, handing him the keys. "As promised, you can have it back now." Vince laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've got a buddy who does demolition derbies. This beast is perfect for that. Big, solid frame, already looks like it's been through war. He'll give me $800 for it, which means you basically rented this masterpiece for $400. Worth it?" I glanced across the street, where Karen was pretending not to watch from behind her living room curtains. "Best $400 I ever spent," I assured him. As Vince loaded the Pontiac onto his flatbed, several neighbors emerged from their homes to witness the car's departure. Dave wandered over, coffee mug in hand. "End of an era," he observed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. That thing was starting to grow on me, like a giant rusty garden gnome. "All good things must come to an end," I replied. "But the positive impact lives on." Dave chuckled. "Indeed it does. Karen actually smiled at my wife yesterday. I thought Patty might faint from shock." The Pontiac's removal marked the official end of hostilities. Karen kept to our agreement, parking exclusively in her driveway for the first few weeks. Eventually, she returned to street parking, but never again directly across from my driveway. We maintained a cool but civil distance, exchanging curt nods when our paths crossed, but otherwise staying well out of each other's way. Word of our parking war, and its resolution, spread through the neighborhood with impressive speed. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before stopped to chat when I was out working in my yard, often sharing their own Karen stories or simply expressing admiration for my creative solution. "I've been dealing with her complaints about my bird feeders for months," confided Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly widow 2 houses down. "Suddenly, last week, she brings me a potted plant and says she's considering her position on wildlife attractions in the neighborhood, nearly keeled over from surprise." Similar stories emerged from throughout Ridgewood Estates. Karen, it seemed, was undergoing a neighborhood-wide attitude adjustment, not a complete personality transplant. She was still Karen after all, but a noticeably more restrained version of herself. The consensus theory was that she feared other neighbors might follow my example if provoked, turning Ridgewood Estates into a parking lot for vehicular eyesores. The most unexpected development came about 3 months after the Pontiac incident, when I arrived home to find a small package on my front porch. Inside was a gift card to a local car wash and a brief note that read simply, "For your next vehicle. Regards, KD." It wasn't an apology. Karen wasn't capable of that level of humility, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts, a small white flag in our protracted domestic Cold War. I never used the gift card. Instead, I framed it alongside the signed agreement and hung it in my home office. A reminder that sometimes the most effective solution to a problem isn't escalation or capitulation, but creative, perfectly legal petty revenge. Life in Ridgewood Estates settled into a new normal. Karen eventually sold her house and moved to a gated community across town, a development I learned about only when the for sale sign appeared in her yard. Whether our conflict contributed to her decision, I never knew for certain, though I like to think the Pontiac had played at least a small role in her relocation calculus. Her replacement was a young family with twin toddlers and a golden retriever. Neighbors who not only parked in their own driveway, but occasionally brought over freshly baked cookies, just because. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more welcome. As for me, the experience changed my approach to neighborhood disputes in subtle but meaningful ways. I found myself more willing to address issues directly, but also more creative in finding solutions that worked within existing systems. When the teenagers down the street started parking their multiple vehicles in a way that crowded the cul-de-sac, I didn't stew in silent resentment or escalate immediately. I invited their parents over for a cookout and casually worked the topic into conversation. Problem solved, with no hard feelings. Dave and I became genuine friends rather than merely cordial neighbors, regularly gathering for weekend BBQs and eventually starting a neighborhood watch program that brought the community closer together. The infamous parking war became part of Ridgewood Estates folklore, retold at block parties with increasing embellishment as the years passed. I heard the car had actual bullet holes in it. I overheard one newer resident telling another at our 4th of July gathering last year. Not bullet holes, Dave corrected with a wink in my direction. Those were speed holes. Makes the car go faster. Sometimes I drive past Karen's old house and smile at the memory of that hideous Pontiac and what it accomplished. In a world of complex problems requiring sophisticated solutions, it's oddly comforting to remember that sometimes the answer is as simple as a $1,200 rusty car strategically parked to drive your annoying neighbor absolutely insane. If you're watching this video while dealing with your own neighborhood parking dispute, remember, creativity trumps confrontation. Documentation is your best friend. And sometimes the most powerful response to pettiness is to embrace it fully, elevate it to an art form, and serve it back with a smile. Just make sure you stay on the right side of the law and maybe invest in a good security camera before you begin. Oh, and as for that $900 mirror repair, I eventually received an envelope in the mail containing 9 $100 bills and a note that simply read, "Refund for previous transaction. No further correspondence necessary." It arrived the day after Karen's house went on the market. I used the money to buy a doorbell camera system for my house and donated the remaining funds to the Neighborhood Association's Park Improvement Project. Sometimes justice arrives late, but it arrives nonetheless. Last week, I ran into Officer Martinez at the local coffee shop. He recognized me immediately and broke into a broad grin. "Mr. Harrington, haven't had to visit your street in quite some time. How's that parking situation working out?" "Resolved to everyone's satisfaction," I assured him, though I sometimes miss that hideous Pontiac. It had character. He laughed. "That's one word for it. You know, we still talk about that case at the precinct. The sergeant uses it as an example of creative conflict resolution in community policing workshops." "Happy to be educational," I replied with a smile. "You should be. You'd be surprised how many neighbor disputes end badly. Restraining orders, property damage, even violence. Yours ended with just egg on a car that honestly couldn't look much worse. That's a win in our book." I hadn't thought about it that way before, but he was right. In the grand scheme of neighborhood conflicts, ours had resolved about as positively as possible. No lasting damage, no legal repercussions, and ultimately, a neighborhood improvement with Karen's departure. As I paid for my coffee, Martinez added, "By the way, your famous Pontiac made an appearance at the County Fair Demolition Derby last month, painted purple with yellow flames by then, but unmistakably the same car. Took second place. Thought you might like to know." I laughed all the way back to my car. There was something poetically perfect about that eyesore's final chapter. Battered but unbowed, still causing a stir, still somehow coming out ahead, despite everything thrown at it. Kind of like me. The moral of this story isn't that you should run out and buy a junk car to solve your neighbor problems. It's simpler than that. Sometimes, when reason fails and authorities can't help, the solution isn't to sink to your opponent's level, but to meet them there with better strategy and cleaner execution. Karen taught me that parking could be a weapon. I just figured out how to aim it more effectively. So the next time someone tells you to take the high road, remember, sometimes the low road gets you there faster. with a better story to tell when you arrive. Just make sure you've got good documentation, a solid understanding of local ordinances, and maybe a friend with an ugly car they're willing to lend to the cause. And hey, if you're watching this while hiding from your own HOA meeting or neighborhood drama, drop a comment letting me know how your parking situation is going. I'm always looking for new strategies to add to my arsenal, just in case another Karen moves onto my street.